Hello and welcome. This is Mike Adams, the Health Ranger. This is the Health Ranger Report with naturalnews.com. Today we are interviewing investigative reporter Jon Rappoport from NoMoreFakeNews.com. He's been breaking some of the most amazing headlines and revelations regarding the CDC whistleblower, and that whistleblower's coming forward with documents showing that the CDC knowingly engaged in astonishing scientific fraud to cover up links between the MMR vaccine and autism in young African-American children. Now, Jon Rappoport, being a veteran investigative reporter, has looked into this probably more than anyone else alive today, and he's got a lot of information to share with us in this segment. Again, if you want to check out his website, it's NoMoreFakeNews.com. Jon, welcome to the Health Ranger Report.
Great to be here, Mike. Thanks.
Well, it's great to have you on, Jon. In fact, I got to tell you, I'm not doing a lot of interviews these days, but this is a special case, and you're a special reporter, so I had to make an exception and talk to you about this.
Well, I'm glad you did. I appreciate it. Well, it started with a video, short video, which was an interview with an anonymous man who was confessing, apparently, in this interview, that he had engaged in fraud as the author of a study on the MMR vaccine, measles, mumps, rubella, and its possible connection to autism. And that study, which was done in 2004 at the CDC, called the DiStefano study, claimed there was no connection at all. And he was saying that's wrong. He was saying that he participated in fraud, basically, and so did others. The thing was, we didn't know who he was. He was anonymous at that point. And he wasn't making as completely forthright a statement as I'm, telling it to you right now. It was more or less by implication. A few days later, he goes public. The video now has his name on it, William Thompson, a PhD researcher. And indeed, he is one of the co-authors of that 2004 study.
And he's been with the CDC for well over a decade.
Yeah, he's a veteran. He's been there for quite a while. So a storm completely engulfs, the community of parents who have children with autism, people who are in the natural health movement, all sorts of people. And this story becomes riveting.
But let me set the tone here, too, to provide a little background context. For the last decade, anyone who has even hinted that vaccines might be linked to autism has been viciously and aggressively attacked by the mainstream media, by the vaccine-pushing community, by the pharmaceutical company shills, the trolls online. I mean, everybody has been just attacked relentlessly, saying that they're anti-science if they think that vaccines are related in any way to any increased risk of autism. So, we are talking about a scientific dictatorship that has been in operation for the last decade, which we now know was entirely fabricated. I mean, this is crucial to understand. I mean, Dr. Wakefield, for example, his career was destroyed by these people.
Absolutely, yeah. His career was destroyed. His life was almost destroyed.
His medical license was revoked.
Yep, absolutely.
It was every mainstream media outlet that you can imagine called him a quack.
Right.
So I just mentioned all this, Jon, because it's important for our listeners to understand. The CDC knew about this 10 years ago, really more than 10 years ago, but at least 10 years. They knew that Dr. Wakefield was right. They knew that vaccines cause autism risks in African-American children. They knew that they fabricated, retroactively altered the study data to commit fraud. and this went to the highest levels of the CDC.
And then when you add on top of that the fact that having committed the fraud 10 years ago, they stood by and watched literally as more and more children developed autism as a result of vaccines and did nothing about it. So that's an incredible amount of, I don't even know what to call it, but it's vicious.
Against humanity, yeah. This is the other aspect of this that I want your comments on. The fact that this study showed that MMR vaccines disproportionately caused harm to African American children. And it brings up so many questions. Would the CDC have gone public with this if white babies had been harmed by it? Or did they say in their own minds, oh, because it's black babies, we can cover this up and it doesn't matter? I mean, that kind of horrible, racist, eugenics, genocidal type of thought. Is that what the CDC, is that what drove the CDC to make this decision? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we know that the CDC has a history here with the infamous Tuskegee experiment that had to do with black sharecroppers in the South who had syphilis and were watched by the CDC as an experiment, allowing the syphilis to develop and go through all of its stages and so forth. And even after treatment was available, they still carried on with this experiment and would have never revealed it had it not been exposed in 1972. So there's a history there, no question about it.
There's also the history of the National Institutes of Health, with government money performing experiments on Guatemalan prisoners. There's a long history of medical experiments conducted on minorities, prisoners, African Americans. It's an extraordinary history that a lot of people don't know, but it's there.
Definitely there. Definitely there. So it looked like we were going to get very soon a public statement that William Thompson, the CDC whistleblower, who had just said that he participated in fraud, scientific fraud, was going to step before the cameras in front of the press and say, my name is William Thompson. I committed fraud at the CDC in 2004, along with the co-authors of the study that we did, in which we claimed there was no connection between the MMR vaccine and autism, and we lied knowingly because we were told to omit data on these young African American children and thereby gave the impression that there was no connection between the vaccine and autism, when in fact there was. That's what we expected was going to happen.
And yet it didn't.
And yet it didn't.
Someone got to him before that day came.
It certainly appears that way. If they didn't get to him before then, they've certainly got to him now, because now he has a lawyer, Rick Morgan, and Morgan has stated, my client is satisfied that the accurate data are now out there and the scientific community can make a judgment about them. And my client has no plans to make a public statement or to discuss these matters any further. So that's the story that's now being told. I know from a report that last week, Thompson, who has still been working at the CDC, was escorted off the premises, has a problem with security guards. So we don't know whether he's been officially fired or he's just been told to stay home. But we can be sure that enormous pressure has been brought against him to keep him from talking out. Threats, promises, this is a situation where a whistleblower could be killed.
Absolutely. And our listeners need to keep that in mind. Many people don't realize the lengths to which the vaccine establishment will go to silence real science. And this individual, you have to understand, the CDC has the entire vaccine industry to protect. Look at the former head of the CDC, Dr. Julie Gerberding, who was the head at the time this took place and is complicit in this cover-up. She's now a key executive working at Merck, head of the global vaccine division. CDC scientists and bureaucrats understand that if they do a good job promoting the interests of the vaccine industry while they work at the CDC, they stand a very high chance of being rewarded with high-paying jobs and bonuses by the vaccine manufacturers. And at the same time, the Obama administration has prosecuted more government whistleblowers than any president in the history of our country. So, look at Edward Snowden. Our government wants to kill him. And many members of government have openly stated that. They would like to assassinate Snowden. So anybody out there who thinks that Thompson here is not in the crosshairs of some government operative is kidding themselves.
Yeah, no question about it. And then there's Thompson's family. This runs the gamut. When you go up against the juggernaut and you are a member of the juggernaut, that's a whole different situation from somebody coming in from the outside.
That's right.
And criticizing or attacking the CDC. This is like the mafia. You join and you're there really forever, even if you quit. You can't stand up and say, my people in the mafia are criminals and I'm ready to disclose exactly what they did. It's the same situation that Thompson is in right now.
It reminds me a little bit of Dr. David Graham of the FDA, who is the FDA scientist who came out several years ago now to warn about the dangers of Vioxx. And in fact, according to Dr. Graham's calculations, Vioxx had killed more Americans than the entire Vietnam War. And the FDA covered that up. So now the CDC is a different organization, but very much operating with not just the same degree of maliciousness and covering up truth, but I think even more so. I think those of us who are in the independent media, like yourself and myself, we understand there's a spectrum of evil out there, and the FDA is at one point on the spectrum of evil, but the CDC is at a heightened position on the spectrum of evil. Would you agree with that, or what are your thoughts on that?
It's hard to compare. I mean, I've assembled so much information on the FDA. I would say they're like twin stars floating roughly in the same position in the sky as far as evil is concerned. But I think I understand what you mean, because the CDC can distort, invent, cook up data on diseases, disease threats, phony epidemics. They can rewrite the medical books, really, any way they want to present a situation to the American people. And they can say, for example, that if you don't get vaccinated, then you're in grave danger and everybody has to get vaccinated. And here's the latest reason why. And they can lie about what is being injected directly into people's bodies through vaccines, say that all the chemicals that are toxic are really safe. They can say that the germs that are intentionally put in the vaccines and the other germs that just happen to find their way in there through the manufacturing process, that's all safe. All of this is an incredible lie, and they keep telling that lie over and over again. And in addition to that, they are a public relations agency with extremely close ties to the press, the mainstream press. Yeah. So they can make stories appear in the press that would never get in the press any other way and just absolutely keep lying to the American people, which they do.
It's elaborate medical theater is one way I've heard it described. But let's talk about the press for a minute. The mainstream media has conducted a complete a total media blackout on this story. No one in the mainstream will report it. And I had actually been told last week from one of my sources that the New York Times, among other mainstream outlets, were being ordered to stand down on this story and censor it. Then we saw some citizen journalists post first one story on CNN's iReport website, which is kind of a citizen journalism sub-site of CNN. That story began to go viral. CNN clobbered that. Then a second story reappeared, and that started to go viral. CNN shut that story down. And then, due to a massive backlash from the public, CNN, as of today, has actually reinstated both of those stories with an editor's note saying that they are checking with the CDC to find out if this is real or not. So that's where things stand at the moment.
That's right.
This is headed.
Yeah, and the backlash is the important point here, because even major media networks feel the pressure and feel the heat when enough people from the public, put it on and light the match and say, thousands upon thousands of people suddenly rebel against the whole concept that this citizen website can be knocked off. We'll take a story down here. We'll lie about why we took it down. That has a tremendous effect. And of course, that's really coming from the internet. It's not coming from people that are picking up newspapers on newspaper stands.
Right.
So what will happen here is going to be interesting, because obviously the CDC is going to say to CNN, these reports by citizens are complete fabrications. Nothing could be further from the truth, et cetera, et cetera. And they may take the stories down again. People have to remember that the CDC and CNN headquarters are, in the same city in Atlanta. Yes. All you have to do in CNN is get in a cab if you want to, and pick up the phone. I mean, let's have lunch. What do you think of this? It takes 10 minutes to find out. So they're stalling. They don't know quite what to do with CNN. These reports are getting more hits and views and so forth than a whole lot of their regular news stories. Right?
Yeah. Right.
So they're in a hole.
Well, and consider this too. CNN was very quick to leap to coverage of Ferguson, Missouri riots with African-American teen Mike Brown being shot and killed by a police officer there. CNN was one of the mainstream media sources that really went to bat for Mike Brown, and in a sense really tried to kind of foment a lot of racial hatred towards law enforcement. Whether it's justified or not is not the point of this conversation, but rather the contrast. If CNN is out to protect African Americans, well, what about the CDC situation? I mean, here's a case where it's not just shooting one teen, but shooting up millions of black babies with something that the CDC knew would cause permanent harm. And CNN is silent on this story? Now that's a contradiction right there.
Exactly. Incredible contradiction. And listeners should understand, well, all I can say is for 30 years as a reporter, I've been writing that the medical arena is a special arena. It has a kind of protection and propaganda that nothing else on the planet has. I don't care what it is. So many people have been brainwashed into believing so many lies about medical miracles and the sanctity of doctors and this and that and the other thing and so forth, that for a media network to go up against an establishment like the vaccine establishment, it's almost like committing suicide. I mean, they're partners. They're joined at the hip, these huge media networks, with the CDC, with the federal government medical complex, with medical schools and doctors. It's not like there's a real separation there at all.
And it's a really good point, John. And I want to throw this in. Let's be clear that CNN prints all kinds of things that are pro-pharmaceutical without any proof whatsoever. For example, CNN practically announced that the experimental Ebola drug ZMapp is solely responsible for saving the life of Dr. Brantley, was it?
Yeah.
It's a completely it's a total leap of faith by CNN. There's no proof at all that this drug helped that doctor. Other people who've been given the drug have died. There's no evidence whatsoever that the drug is safe or effective. It's purely experimental. CNN that didn't hold them back. If they want to run a pro-pharmaceutical story, they will take any leap that is necessary. But when it comes to a vaccine story that's critical of vaccines, well, then they say, oh, no, this has to be fully proven and documented. So, clearly they only require proof on one side of the debate.
I can tell you that Sharyl Attkisson, who was a star investigative reporter for CBS and eventually quit, one of her really big problems with CBS was not that she was covering Benghazi and Fast and Furious and writing information that the government and the Obama administration didn't want the public to know. Yeah, that was a problem. But I think a bigger problem that CBS had with her was that she would occasionally write stories that were critical of vaccines and the CDC. And that this was a really big no-no. Absolutely. And in fact, I know that for quite a long time, her Wikipedia page would carry the information, something to the effect, she's been accused of being anti-vaccine. And then she would have that change, and somebody would change it back, and then it would be changed. She would change it again. It would be changed back, and she would protest. And nothing she did for quite a long time had any effect whatsoever.
Yeah.
So we're talking about major efforts to silence the press whenever they get too close to the truth about vaccines in this case.
Well, and we know that Wikipedia is dominated and run by pharmaceutical interests. There's no question about that. Wikipedia has no more credibility than CNN on these issues. But
and vice versa.
Yeah, right. But here's a question for you, John. First of all, why do you think that protection of vaccines, the vaccine mythology or the vaccine delusion, is so crucial to our society today? Because, I should say crucial to the institutions that dominate society today. The media, the medical institutions, government, and so on. Because remember, the vaccine industry is, I believe, the only industry in this country that's been granted absolute, complete legal immunity, placing it above the U.S. Supreme Court. There is no other industry with such immunity. It is the only industry that enjoys an absolute and total media blackout on all stories that raise rational scientific questions about the safety and efficacy of vaccines. And it is the only industry that continues to be allowed to inject children and pregnant women with a known neurotoxin, which is mercury. So there are extraordinary protections that have been erected for the vaccine industry. And my question to you is why? Why is this so crucial to the powers that be?
Well, I'd say there are two reasons. One is the medical cartel, as I call it, has an ultimate fallback position in defending itself and saying, we're the greatest. And that fallback position is vaccines. If you were to wipe out somehow everything else they do, they would say, yes, but we prevent millions and millions, untold billions of people from getting sick and dying because of vaccines. This is our greatest triumph. This proves that we are, the kings. And that cornerstone must never tremble, must never be attacked. So they have a tremendous vested interest in that, number one. Number two is, as we were discussing before we started the interview, Uh, this is weaponized warfare against the people. I mean, let's just call it like it is. You've got toxic chemicals and germs being directly injected into people that bypass ordinary layers of defense in their immune system, poison them, cause them to get sick, cause long-term chronic illnesses of all kinds, including autism. You weaken the population, you destroy lives, you make it less and less possible for people to live strong, healthy, independent lives, which would be lives that are critical of the establishment, the medical establishment, the political establishment, the expansion of government in horrendous ways, the militarization of police forces across the country. Control from above is what we're talking about. And when people, are in control and they are psychopaths, they want to do everything in their power to weaken the population so that the population can't resist. And weaponized poison, vaccines, is a tremendous way to do that.
That's a really important point. If you look back into the history of Europe, the kings there would make sure that the populations that they dominated did not have enough food, so the people could never rise up and be physically large and strong and have a rebellion, against the power of the king. Today, the fact that there continues to be mercury in vaccines deliberately, and it's listed right on the labels, and I've also confirmed it in my mass spectrometry laboratory, 50 parts per million in flu larval vaccines, influenza vaccines.
Wow.
This is a lobotomy weapon. It dumbs people down. It causes neurological damage. It lowers IQs. It lowers cognitive function. And never before have we seen the push now for pregnant women to be vaccinated as strong as it is today. We've seen shockingly, in decades past, all doctors were taught never give a vaccine to a pregnant woman. Today, nurses groups and doctors and vaccine trolls are pushing hard for pregnant women to be injected with flu vaccines containing mercury. Now that has to be a deliberate effort to poison those women, to cause miscarriages, to damage the neurological development of the child. There is no doctor, there's no scientist in the world who can say that mercury is safe for pregnant women, and yet they're calling for it to be injected into them. So I concur with your analysis, Jon, that is a weaponization program disguised as an immunization program.
Yeah, it's truly, truly horrendous. So from everything that we're talking about here, and now you look back at this whistleblower, William Thompson, you can begin to imagine the kind of pressure that could be put on him to shut up, to stay silent, to bow out of the situation. You've gone too far already, William. You've made a grievous mistake. But there's a chance that you can survive this if you will do the following things. This is just the beginning of the kind of pressure that can be brought on him by this enormous establishment. And so to me, it's no wonder that he's not talking. Although if he would have spoken immediately and gone public, please, and said his name and made a complete statement, that would have been his best protection. But unfortunately, he came out halfway. He was half in the light, half in the shadow, and that is the most dangerous place to be, and that's exactly where he is.
Yes, it is. I think it's also important to mention that the autism community would welcome him to go public and on the record, and they would not punish him for that. They would seek to protect him. He could instantly make millions of new allies in the truth movement by going public with what he knows. he has no friends anymore in the vaccine CDC pharma industry, no matter what he does. And he can't exactly go back and say, no, I take that back, because he's already released the data. So the data is already out there now, and the data are irrefutable. So he's really only got one choice, I think, at this point, which is to tell the truth, go all the way, be willing to testify under oath before perhaps a congressional committee, and go on the record with what he knows, and let the cards fall where they may.
Right. This is the right strategy. You go to the extreme. If you're going to tell the truth, and the truth is dangerous, you better tell the whole truth, and you better go all the way. Not only should he have already released a video saying that he would testify in front of Congress, but he should have gone even further and said, and I will be testifying in any lawsuits brought against the CDC.
Yes.
Go all the way. That's the point. And unfortunately, for many scientists, it's drilled into them to be cautious. Well, this is not the time for caution on his part. He still has a chance here, but he's going to have to do something radically different from what he's doing now.
Let's also remember that this man, he participated in the cover-up. He was once one of the vaccine pushers who voluntarily agreed to become complicit in what can only be called a conspiracy inside the CDC to lie to the public about vaccine safety. He now regrets that, but that's where he used to be. In fact, in the letter that we released, that authored by him, he talked about how we have to win the public relations war on vaccines. But his point was we have to tell the truth, whereas Dr. Gerberding and the other CDC scientists decided, no, we have to lie. So what's really at stake here, and I'd like your comments on this is not just about this one study or this one scientist. This is about, can we ever trust the institution of the CDC? Because if the CDC would lie about this study, then what else have they lied about? What else have they fabricated or retroactively altered to fit their pro-pharmaceutical agenda? Now, I think, John, we have to go back and we have to vet everything the CDC has done, everything the CDC scientists have published in the last 20 years.
No question about it. Absolutely. People have to understand, we're talking here again about a 2004 study called the DiStefano study, which concluded there was no connection between the MMR vaccine and autism. That is a major thing. Thompson was one of the co-authors on that study. He was involved in the fraud that came to that conclusion, and now he has admitted that it was all a fraud. But that is only one vaccine. What about the DTaP vaccine? What about all the other vaccines that are given to children, the hepatitis B vaccine, et cetera, the flu vaccines? All of these now come, well, you and I mean, to say they come under scrutiny. We've been writing and talking about this for years and years and years, but the public has to understand that it's all up for grabs. There's absolutely no reason to trust anything that the CDC has ever said. And as a journalist who's been doing this for a long time, my urging is those people who have this treasure trove of data that Thompson, the whistleblower, sent to them, release all the raw data now, post it online everywhere around the world. There are several reasons for that, but one of the reasons is that once you start the ball rolling, you're going to find out that what you know now is only a fraction of what's going to come out. Mm-hmm. New whistleblowers are going to show up. New rats are going to desert the sinking ship and confess to their sins. And the story is going to expand and grow and grow and grow. And that's what we have to do now.
Yeah, well said. And those who possess this data set also need to understand that their lives are in danger, that there are many cases throughout recent history of journalists and investigators being killed when they publicly announced they had something that they were about to release.
Mhm.
Is it Gary Webb? Is that one of them?
Yeah.
The CIA. He was covering the CIA. He was killed. Of course, Andrew Breitbart was killed not too long ago. I'm sure there are more.
Michael Hastings.
Hastings, correct.
Yeah, there are lots of cases of this. I've come across a number of reporters. Who was the one? Danny, I can't remember, Schechter, I think. Yeah. If you have data, release it yesterday.
Yeah, right.
Don't
Right.
say, look what I have that I'm going to do something with now.
Right.
That's like painting a target on your chest.
It really is, and that's why I've always had the policy, as I know you have. If someone sends us something, we release it. We don't sit on it and then go online and say, oh, we have this damning evidence and we're going to release it in a couple of weeks. No, you release it now because you may not be here in a couple of weeks. You're sitting on valuable, damning information.
Absolutely. And I think, excuse me, I think we can win that way because there are a group of mothers right now. As of yesterday, there were 216 of them who are forming up a class action lawsuit against the CDC for fraud on exactly this issue of the MMR vaccine and the connection to autism. By now, they probably have more than 216, and it's growing. They need this data. Put it out there. Make this, a slam dunk completely in every way. We don't know what's going to happen to the whistleblower Thompson. We don't know whether he will eventually come out and say anything. We don't know what will be done to him. Right. Can't just sit around waiting and hoping that he's going to show up one day at a press conference and say, here's the whole story. That doesn't work.
No. My next question for you is, at what point do you think the media will, if at any point, be willing to cover this story and give it the coverage it deserves? And I want to ask you this question leading into that. Imagine if this researcher, Dr. Thompson, imagine if he had been a researcher of medicinal herbs.
Oh, God.
And he had a lot of studies published on the safety and efficacy of herbs, and then he came out and admitted that it was a fraud. Now, every media outlet would make that a front page story.
Yeah, he'd be elected president of the United States.
Yeah, right. Everyone would
We've decided to change the country into a monarchy, and this guy is going to be king. That's what would happen, right, if he did that.
But
sure,
his findings, the content of his findings, the media selectively chooses to ignore it. So what's it going to take, John, for the media to actually cover this story?
Well, here's what I think could happen. If all the data, as I've been saying, is released online and it gets around the world and the story just explodes and we've got all kinds of people weighing in, analyzing the data, writing about it. It's just getting huge public attention. Then the media are going to have to cover it in some way. They will now cover it as a controversy.
Right.
They will say there's a tremendous controversy. Then they'll bring in the experts who say, yes, it's amazing how much the public doesn't understand, and vaccines are wonderful, and so forth and so on. So that will be the level at which the media actually cover it. They will never say that, the CDC is culpable for who knows how many thousands of deaths and destruction of life through vaccine damage. But they can sort of unintentionally contribute to the explosive nature of the story and how wide it's going to go by just covering it as a controversy. That's all. I mean, I wouldn't even ask for that much, but if they go that far, that's good. That's fine. And then there are going to be court cases that are going to add more to the story. And eventually what's going to happen is more and more people are going to opt out of getting vaccines beyond anything that the government can do or say.
It is. I actually kind of like the fact that the mainstream media continues to censor this story because it just shows their complete lack of ethics. It really shows them for who they are. And it's part of the reason why the mainstream media is losing readers by the day. I mean, New York Times is just a shadow of what it used to be.
Yeah, I mean,
across the board.
Used to take 3 people to carry the Sunday edition of the New York Times. You know, now you can stick it in your pocket. Yeah, exactly. They're dying completely. I mean, CNN could simply make their entire website into an report, knock out every other story, and they would get more readers and hits and views than they do now. And they know that. And they have no idea what to do about it because they have no answer.
Well, yeah, exactly right. And let's keep in mind that CNN's founder, Ted Turner, is on the record saying he supports depopulation and thinks we need to reduce the global population by 5 billion people. That's on the record. And Bill Gates is on the record saying that one of the best ways to reduce population is to have improved vaccination programs. I mean, that's an actual quote from Bill Gates that he said publicly, and we've got videos of him saying that. So CNN must be towing that line, saying, you know, well, vaccines are really important for this whole depopulation agenda that we are pushing.
Yeah, they kind of leave that last part of the statement out there. Let's not talk about that part. But yeah, we'll say that vaccines are very important. Somebody asked me the other day, I can't remember who it was, about control of the media. And I said, you know, at this point, nobody needs to exert active control over major media. Occasionally, yes. But day to day, the whole thing runs like a machine. In the old days, you know, Citizen Hearst and all of that business, and the guy who's a publisher pounding his fist on the desk and saying, don't print that story because, you know, it'll hurt interests of mine and whatever. Yeah, okay, but now it's a machine. The reporters know what they can say and can't say. The editors know what they can allow and can't allow. Everybody knows. They're trained dogs. They understand intuitively and rationally on every level where they can go and where they can't go. And if, you know, the publisher and the top managing editors of CNN all died in one night, the whole operation would continue to run in exactly the same way because everybody's a robot. That's what we're dealing with. And that's the way major media operate. That's what they do. And then occasionally they break a scandal and a story and everybody goes, well done, lads, and nice work and so forth. And then they just go back to the usual robot activity. But the one thing that does stir them out of their sleep somewhat is if metaphorically they look out the window and they see a mob out in the street of 50,000 or 100,000 people waving pitchforks and carrying torches. When they feel public pressure, the heat really build up and expand exponentially, asymmetrically, they tend to wake up because they feel that their own survival is threatened. And then they make a lot of mistakes and they do a lot of stupid things, which then they can be called on. And that's what I believe is starting to happen with this CDC scandal now.
It has begun. I know that some people in the we should say the autism community believe that this might be a real turning point. And if we look at the history of medicine, we have to understand there were many, many times when the delusions of the day were shattered. You know, mercury was once thought to be medicine. Doctors prescribed mercury salts to people to consume as medicine. Lewis and Clark, the famous explorers, were given all kinds of mercury pills to take with them on their journey. In fact, archaeologists can trace where they were by following the trail of mercury. It's true.
Wow.
So that delusion was shattered at some point, but then it kind of came back in the form of vaccines now. So, there was a time when doctors wouldn't wash their hands, right? Who was it? Semmelweis was the whistleblower who was thrown in a mental institution for saying that there are tiny invisible germs that cause sepsis in the bodies of women who are delivering babies. He was condemned as crazy, but then later on was shown to be correct. So things do change sometimes. There are paradigm shifts that happen. And the question is, are we at a pivotal moment which could result in that kind of a paradigm shift where the whole world begins to understand that, okay, immunization now needs to be looked at in a whole new way because it can be dangerous if the wrong things are in the shot?
I think you're right. I think we could be at one of those turning points. And I know there are a lot of people who would say, oh, impossible, can't happen. But as you point out, there are times in history where amazing things do happen. And this could be one of them. Starts out as a spark, a little flame, and before you know it, it's a conflagration. And the whole paradigm just has to shift. So we could be there with this one.
And I think it's also important to note what might change it. The industry is not going to give up the idea of immunization, but what about the public waking up, and even the medical industry and doctors waking up to the idea that immunization should not include these toxic chemicals, thimerosal, mercury, other adjuvants that are used in many vaccines, such as aluminum-based adjuvants. There are some that are fatty acid-based. They're very toxic. So, I wouldn't. They're not going to give up their vaccines, but could they shift to this paradigm of, hey, maybe vaccines should be, quote, safer?
They could. I mean, my position is I'm never satisfied until they're eliminated completely. That's me, because I feel like, they're dangerous. The whole concept is dangerous, but their improvements could be made. And in fact, people have to be alert for what in the intelligence community they call a limited hangout, which is you partially confess your sins and then you say, okay, we're going to fix this. Right. But you don't really fix the problem. You just apply rouge and lipstick and makeup and make a few little changes. So we don't know what changes they would say they're going to make and if they're really going to make them. But yeah, that's possible. That is a possible change that could happen.
Well, so for example, the CDC in this case could come out and say, here's an example of what they could say to get out of this. They could say, this whistleblower is distorting the science. Vaccines are safe, but out of an overabundance of caution, we are going to call for the gradual phasing out of mercury from vaccines over the next 5 years, because we love people so much, and we are so interested in public safety and protecting babies. And what they won't tell you is that they're going to replace the mercury with something far more toxic over those 5 years.
Yeah.
So it may be, I don't know, thallium or something. They'll find some other.
Yeah, right. We have this stuff here that's, from a nuclear power plant we don't know what to do with.
Exactly.
I think it would be great in a vaccine.
Yes. Yeah. They could say something like that, and they could replace it with something more toxic and kind of deflect this whole controversy.
Yes, they could definitely try to do that. I foresee them saying something they like to do, looking at the entire picture, not just this study in 2004, but the whole literature on the MMR vaccine and that study, the experts have been through this a number of times, and the evidence, the whole weight of evidence is on the side of safety. You know, that's the kind of thing they'll start off that way.
Yeah,
that's their first fallback. You know,
right.
So people have to be ready for that. That's the way they phrase this.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Well, Jon, we're gonna wrap this up, but I want to thank you for all of your thoughts and ideas and your outstanding reporting on this groundbreaking historical story. And I want to encourage our listeners to visit your website at NoMoreFakeNews.com. And Jon, if there's any other time you've got breaking news you want to come on and do another interview with me for natural news readers, I'd be happy to chat with you and get an update from you.
Thanks, Mike. I really appreciate it. And I think this was a great conversation we just had, because a lot of people need to hear this information. And I think some really positive things are happening here with this situation right now. And there's definitely more to come.
Absolutely. A lot more to come. And remember that where we are coming from, folks, is that Jon and I both, we want to protect life. We want medicine to be safe and not toxic. And the CDC just wants medicine to be profitable, regardless of what harms in the process.
Right.
So keep that in mind. Well, thank you, Jon. Great to talk with you today.
Thanks so much, Mike.